I recently watched a video by my teacher, Gary Dow, recollecting his time spent studying with the late, great jazz improvisation teacher, Charlie Banacos. Now, if you haven't seen that video yet, then you really need to watch it by clicking over here because it's jam-packed with some great information. Notice at 18 minutes 54, where Gary talks about how Charlie Banacos taught people to develop an internal feel by learning to count out loud while playing. He also talks about how Charlie didn't recommend practicing with a metronome as counting out loud develops your own internal clock. After practicing using this methodology, learning to play with a metronome becomes a much easier process. Now, before I get a slew of negative comments about how playing with a metronome is the holy grail to developing time and feel, consider this. The metronome was invented around 1812. Does that mean that everybody in the world of Western classical music pre-Beethoven had bad time? What about African percussion ensembles? What about the art of Indian conical? I can assure you that none of these people are using a metronome to develop their sense of time or feel. Yeah, but a lot of people will say that so many records were recorded with a click track. Click tracks started with movie soundtracks back in the late 60s into the early 70s and beyond. In popular music, click tracks didn't become commonplace until the 80s when MIDI was invented. I know this because I started my career as a studio musician in London in the early 80s and saw this transition firsthand. Do you think early Tower of Power records were recorded with a click? Do you think that any jazz record other than perhaps some fusion was recorded with a click? John Coltrane, early Miles Davis, Keith Jarrett, Freddie Hubbard, McCoy Tyner, Charles Mingus, Wynton Marsalis. Man, even bands like Weather Report never used a click track when they recorded. I'm not saying that you shouldn't play with a metronome or that it's necessarily bad for you, but what I want to show you today is an exercise how to develop your internal feel. So stay with me. Rhythm is defined as the organization of music in respect to time, but it's important to add that the rhythmic character of a phrase or any part of a composition provides the distinction regarding style. So the rhythmic elements that create that distinction includes meter, rhythmic subdivisions, level of rhythmic density, groupings of notes that imply other meters, along with syncopation, hemiolas, and other rhythmic displacements. You know, my ability to improvise noticeably improved after I went through that same rhythmic study that Gary Dow described in his video. For those of you that don't know, I studied with Charlie Banacos for about 10 years, and I've been studying with Gary Dow for the last 7 years. Now, if you haven't seen my tribute video to Charlie Banacos, then you need to get that by clicking over here. Now, the key to developing your own internal clock is by counting out loud. This is what Charlie Banacos taught me. So if we take a C minor 7th chord and we group all the notes in groupings of 3 notes, only using chord tones, we're going to end up with this. Root, flat 3, 5, flat 3, 5, flat 7, 5, flat 7, root, flat 7, root, flat 3, root, flat 3, 5, flat 3, 5, flat 7. If I play the line, it's going to be like this. Okay, so my question to you now is, what rhythm was I playing when I played that line? What was that? Oh yeah, that's right. You're not going to understand what that is unless you hear a reference of the pulse. So you notice I wasn't counting anything, I wasn't tapping my foot, so there's no reference, I was just playing the line. So it's all about where you're referencing the pulse to what that rhythm is going to actually be. And it can be a variety of things. So for instance, it could be triplets because we're grouping them in 3 notes. So I could go 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1 triplet, 3 triplet, 4. It could also be eighths. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 1. And it could also be 16ths. 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1. So it's depending upon where I'm feeling those pulses to the outcome of the line rhythmically. Notice that if I play it all in triplets to where I'm going 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, everything's falling on the downbeat. Like all those, the beginning of every third note falls on the downbeat. And it sounds a bit predictable, maybe in context. If you change it to the 16s where I'm going 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1, what happens is that suddenly I'm creating this cross rhythm, or some people call it a hemiola, and that's where we're implying this kind of different time over a time, because it's grouped in 3, so I have 3 against the rhythmic group, which is 4. And that ends up really sounding cool in context. So right there, you could use that in something, and that would sound great. And I'm only using chord tones. So melodically and harmonically, it's quite inside, but the embellishment becomes the rhythm. The rhythm is the thing that takes it outside the goalposts and makes it kind of hip. So that's very cool for applying, because I could play that exact line and then, lead into something else, and that would work for me, in an actual tune. So this is the kind of thing that we're looking to get out of this, and also developing that command and mastery of where the pulse is, and also understand against the pulse that I'm playing, what subdivisions am I playing, and having a command and mastery of that. So the first step is by counting those subdivisions. So notice I did 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, or 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, or 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a, okay? That's the first step. The second step is that you're just going to count the pulse over the whole deal. So instead of counting the 1 triplet, 2 triplet, etc., I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, if I do eighths, it's going to be like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. If I do it in 16s, it's going to be this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. Now, it might look easy to you on this video, me counting out loud and playing those. I assure you, this is not easy. This will kick your ass. You've got to practice this. And the punchline that I get from a lot of students when I show them things like this, they'll show up the next week for the lesson. They'll say, hey, Joe, I could play the exercise, but I can only play it if I don't count. I can't play it if I count. That's where you have to go through that process of coordinating yourself so you can do this. And it's very hard, but the results reap great rewards. As I said before, when I was studying with Charlie, I remember that I was in I was doing a particular course with him, and we came to the end of that course, and on the last lesson he said, I want you to transcribe Keith Jarrett's solo. It was a tune called Solar off of the tribute album with Gary Peacock on bass and Jack DeJohnette on drums. And I checked that track out, and I was like, man, where the hell is 1? I couldn't hear it, and I was an accomplished player at that time. It wasn't like I was some, J-Clegg. I was a guy who was, doing a lot of stuff and playing, complex music. And I could not, for the life of me, feel what was going on with that tune. And so I could hear the notes, that wasn't a problem. It was figuring out what the rhythm was. So I told him, and I said, Charlie, I'm embarrassed, man, that I can't even hear this. And he said, no, don't worry about it. Charlie was always cool. He said, don't worry about it, man. We'll sort that out. The next lesson I get was lesson 1 of this rhythm thing that Gary described in his video. And it took me through, God, it must have been about 25 or 30 lessons through that whole course. And it really, I really had to dig deep and work really hard to understand that. But the outcome of that was that it really elevated my understanding of this stuff. And, when I would go and play with people, I was more in command of what was going on, and, I could hear things better. And it was just everything about it improved my playing. So this is really important because, and I'll tell you a little story here. It's like, most bass players, okay, most bass players who play with other musicians tend to be reliant on the drummers for the time, right? Okay, this is a thing that, a lot of people might not admit this, but they'll admit it to me on a one-to-one basis. And I've taught hundreds and hundreds of students, and everyone admits to this. Yeah, that's me. I'm the one who goes, and if the drummer isn't like good enough, then my gig isn't as good because, I don't have the command of the time. So I'm basically just playing to the drummer, and really don't have that skill of understanding where that groove is. Okay. So this is what that gives you. So what I want you to do is I want you to work on this. I want you to try this. You can then take that particular line and transpose that over all the different chord types and then count that. And that will give you a lot of stuff to work on. Okay? So go try this and let me know in the comments section below how you get along with that too. It's important to understand that everything we learn, we do so that we can feel something naturally. Analyzing, studying, and learning to understand the complexities of rhythmic phrasing, functioning in different contexts, is all about the process of training your ear to hear and make choices while in the heat of a performance. If you're interested in becoming a better improvising bass player and learning great musical content from arpeggios to grooves, then subscribe to my channel now. If you like this video today, then be sure to support my channel by giving it a big thumbs up. And if you really like this video, then please check out my books, my membership website, and my Skype lessons. Until next time, practice smart, work hard, and play creatively.